A terrorist that doesn't have representation gets a lawyer that is funded by the Israeli justice system. They blew up a bus.
Yeah.
They murdered 30 people. They don't have a lawyer. Israel will then fund a lawyer to represent them.
Is there a crime for the syllabus of hate?
Unfortunately, not.
And that's a problem.
It's called perception warfare. That's the very, very clear term that defines how everyone sees Gaza, how they saw Gaza as this romanticized area. When Yasser Arafat calls for a holy jihad and 1 million martyrs marching on Jerusalem, he's not calling for internal change. He's not calling for someone to better themselves. He's calling for people to get up, put suicide belts on their bodies, and to go and murder Jews.
Idea of jihadism and this jihadists and who these are the lovers of death. This is a literal death cult. Today, we are joined by someone whose work sits at the intersection of law, security, and moral clarity. Maurice Hirsch is a retired lieutenant colonel in the IDF and former head of military prosecution for Judea and Samaria. For nearly 2 decades, he prosecuted terrorists and defended Israel's legal rights. Since leaving the army, he has continued this mission as a leading legal strategist, exposing how the Palestinian Authority uses its funds to incentivize terror and shaping Israeli policy to counter these threats. At a time when our world seems confused about the difference between right and wrong, and when terror is too often excused rather than confronted, his voice is a reminder that moral clarity must be matched with legal and strategic action. I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View, a companion to the wake-up call. Please show your appreciation for this podcast by liking it, sharing it, and following me on IsraelEllis.com and on Substack. Tell us about Maurice Hirsch.
Okay, so here's the background. At age 13, I came to Israel for the first time with my school for 5 months. Exchange student program. Fell in love with the place. Got off the plane at the ripe old age of 14 and told my parents, I'm making Aliyah. I'm moving to Israel and I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what's going to be. So they looked at me like the child that I was at the time and they said, okay, those are the fantasies, then there's reality. But that was the goal in life. That was truly the goal in life. I graduated from high school and came and spent a year in Israel volunteering in different programs around the country, in Ashkelon for a while, in Moshavim, Kibbutzim up north for a while. I did a 3-month army program called Malva. And then I went back to England to start my law degree, spent a year studying, came back to Israel. Like, this is the goal, to make Aliyah. We're coming back. We need to learn the language. I'd learned not a small amount of Hebrew in the bars in Ashkelon. You're 18 years old. You want to be able to do what 18-year-old boys do. And so you learn the language as you do. And so I came back for another Ulpan for another 4 months on Kibbutz Givat Brenner. Got thrown off the Ulpan very, very quickly, but spent the summer working with the people on the kibbutz in the fields, just working the land of Israel. Amazing experience. Went back to my second year of my law degree, came back for the third year. I did a sandwich degree, which means you study for 2 years, spend a year working, come back, finish your law degree. And so I spent that year working here as well in Jerusalem with a law firm, with Lawrence Becker. And then I went back to finish my law degree. I finished my final exam. I didn't even wait for the results, and I was on the plane back to come to Israel. At the time, the cutoff date for the difference between doing full-time army service or doing what was called Shlav Bet, just some type of reserve training, was 24 years old. I made sure that I came before that. So I had to do at least a year of compulsory service. And I was called up to the army. I spent the first year in Israel qualifying for the bar, doing my articles, and then taking the bar exams. And then in between the two bar exams, they have 2 bar exams in Israel. They have a written exam. If you pass that, you go on to the oral exam. So in between the two, I went into the army on what can only be recognized as a historic date. Not only because it was the day that I started the army, but it was the 2nd of November, which for most people, who cares? It's just another day. It's the day of the Balfour Declaration. 80 years to the Balfour Declaration. That was the day that I went into the IDF. And from there, I found myself in, making a very long story short, but I found myself in the legal department very, very quickly. I there spent 5 years in doing general legal advice for the Central Command. The Central Command is in charge of Judea and Samaria, fighting terrorism. It was 1998 through 2003. 1998, the height, as it were, of the Oslo Accords, through to 2003, passing over September 2000, the start of the terror war. I started
introduction of the Intifada.
What's called the Intifada,
Yes.
the second Intifada. But Intifada, the word Intifada means a popular uprising. The terror war that started in September was not a popular uprising. It was architected by Yasser Arafat. He had already decided before he went to Camp David. He went to Camp David in June, July 2000. Before he went to Camp David, he had already decided this is going to fail and we are going to start a terror war.
It's interesting the words that are used in mass media and out in the public and the outside world that sort of lessen and minimize what is actually going on. And I think that's a bit of an important point.
And when you use foreign words,
right?
When you use words that you're not exactly clear what their meaning is, globalize the Intifada. Well, what does that mean? That means bring violence to every street around the world and have buses blowing up and have restaurants blowing up. That's what it means.
But to the outside world, it's like a just cause. It's like sort of, oh, that's an uprising. These downtrodden people, they've been occupied, and they just play up on it, and especially into this leftist liberal media narrative. They want to believe it's other than it is, but it really isn't. It's terror.
It's terrorism.
And it's horrible. Terrorism. And it has ruined many thousands of people's lives through useless terror. And I talk about, the word jihad, which is change. Jihad is sort of, the idea of jihad is to change oneself. We have a similar concept in Judaism where we are constantly actualizing for change. But this idea of jihadism and this jihadists and who these are the lovers of death. This is a literal death cult.
I'm a great fan of the film The Usual Suspects. So if you remember the film, and one of the greatest lines there is, the greatest thing the devil ever did was persuading the world that he doesn't exist. The use of the word jihad to describe, oh, it's nice, it's fluffy change for the better. Go and ask the Muslims what they believe jihad actually means. When there's a call to jihad, when Yasser Arafat calls for a holy jihad and 1 million martyrs marching on Jerusalem, he's not calling for internal change. He's not calling for someone to better themselves. He's calling for people to get up, put suicide belts on their bodies, and to go and murder Jews. That's when you ask the Palestinian street, what does the word jihad mean? It means to fight the Jews. And so when you take this word over the oceans, well, they're just involved in jihad. It's self-promotion. It's self-betterment.
It just makes me laugh.
You're fooling yourself.
The stupid people, I call them the stupid people who stand there with their protests and who glorify the subtlety of these words that have such a horrific, much darker meaning and motivation behind them. The other day, I was minding my own business, which I often do, and I'm walking in the street, 7:45 in the morning, and there's these women standing on the corner of a very popular street in Toronto called Bloor and Yonge, one of the most great shopping area. It's like in Oxford Street in London, and they've got signs around them, "Grandmothers for Gaza," and I come up to them and I say to them, "Grandmothers for Gaza? Are you serious? Like, what is going on?" "Well, we're against the genocide." "You're against the genocide of whom?" The Jews, what they're doing in Israel. Have you ever been to Israel? Do you even know what the meaning of genocide is? Do you have any idea what you're talking about? I think that the greatest crime that is being committed internationally is sort of the misrepresentation of what really is happening and the feeding of the narrative. And we can't, I think we've underestimated the abilities of these terrorists. But the fact is they have very sophisticated media capabilities, and they have over many years now, very subtly, have entered into our societies and have created this narrative vilifying Israel, but becoming the victims of, and yet at the same time, what they do here is a completely different thing. It's a completely sort of flip of reality, and we have fallen for it, and they have manipulated the liberal left thinking, and they have used that as the leverage and launch pad for their insidious behavior in order to justify it and rationalize it. And the worst is to get the world to sympathize with them. In a book that I wrote called Moving Through Walls, I talk about the emperor that is wearing no clothes and how everybody is celebrating the wonderful suit that he's wearing until a child yells out that the emperor is wearing no clothes. Well, this is what's going on in North America. This is what's going on in Western societies, and we now see the results. The emperor is wearing no clothes, and people have believed it. And back in Israel, we are calling out. We are calling out that this is completely, they've been duped.
It's called perception warfare. That's the very, very clear term that defines how everyone sees Gaza, how they saw Gaza as this romanticized area. Let's talk about Gaza for a second. When these grandmothers for Gaza are demonstrating on the street, what does it mean? In Gaza, in 2006, they had the democratic process of the election of their leaders. They democratically chose Hamas. They democratically chose a genocidal terrorist organization, internationally designated terrorist organization, not only by Israel, by Canada, by the US, even by the European Union. The Gazans went out and they voted. They voted for Hamas, knowing that they were responsible for suicide attacks, knowing that they were responsible for shooting rockets at Israel, knowing that they were responsible for the wanton murder of Jews, knowing that their charter calls for the destruction of Israel. So they went out and they democratically elected these genocidal terrorists. They then had a dictatorial rule over Gaza for the next 19 years. That's what these grandmothers are really demonstrating for. To leave the Gazan people under the rule, under the governance of these genocidal maniacs.
And the grandmothers, they're just the tip of the iceberg.
They've got no clue. They've got no clue what's going on.
I'm amazed when I see feminists, when I see women who are dressed in their keffiyehs, proudly walking around High Street. And they are.
Ask
and I'm
them
like,
what life in Gaza would have been for them.
I'm like, you stupid. I'm like, you stupid white woman.
Yeah.
Do you know even what it is that you're referring to?
The LGBT community support for Hamas, really, when they're not supporting Gaza.
That
they're
is
supporting
queers
Hamas.
Queers for Palestine.
Queers for Palestine. Like, what are you doing?
Like,
if you lived in Gaza, they would throw you off the roofs of the tallest buildings. They would hang you from cranes. It's unbelievable to see all of these different groups supporting something which they have no clue what it is.
And we can sit here and we can laugh about it because it is so bizarre. It is so bizarre that it is almost humorous. And when you've had a couple of maybe shots of l'chaims or something, and you can actually laugh, but it isn't a laughing joke.
They're drinking stupidity.
They're drinking. They're the useful.
It's a new
idiots.
brand of alcohol.
But it's not a joke in the sense that we shouldn't be taking any of this lightly, because the narrative is actually absorbing into the very fabric of our judicial system that forms policy that could have an impact on those who are defending Israel. Now, Maurice, you are a lieutenant colonel, former lieutenant colonel of the Israeli army, and you've done some tremendous work. Let's talk about a little bit about the things that you've done to prosecute terrorism and to bring to justice, and that spills over into the international community.
Without question. So once I finished off with the general legal advice to the Central Command, I then transitioned to the prosecution. For Judea and Samaria, I spent a lot of time as a prosecutor, as the head of different departments. My final position in 2017, when I left the army, was as the head of the prosecution for Judea and Samaria. On the way, I was also in charge of the deputy head of the prosecution for the Gaza Strip. Before the disengagement, we actually closed the courts. Many people don't know this. The courts were the last functioning Israeli presence in the Gaza Strip before the disengagement. All of the civilians had already been taken out, and we had a few trials to finish up. And then only once those trials had finished did we end officially the military rule of the Gaza Strip.
And those trials were prosecution of terrorism?
Prosecution of terrorism, only terrorism. Since the Oslo Accords, pretty much the military courts only dealt with, or predominantly dealt with different crimes that are related to the field of terrorism. It's membership in terrorist organizations. It's shooting, bombings, planning bombings, creating bombs, shooting rockets, shooting missiles, sending terrorists to murder people. All of that field, and then the fluffy side. What's the fluffy side? Well, it's just children throwing stones. Well, go and tell that to Adele Beaton, a 3-year-old who was murdered.
Is there a sort of an age upon which you are convicted as an adult or convicted as a child?
So the military system works very similar to the Israeli civilian system, in which, and from the minimum age of criminal responsibility, which is 12 in Israel, similarly in Judea and Samaria.
So you're tried as an adult if you're 13?
No. 12 to 18, you're tried as a minor. There's no option of taking someone who's 17 who committed a particularly heinous event, a crime, and saying, well, we're going to try you as an adult. No matter what you did, from 12 to 18, you're a minor.
So very much within the human rights, international laws, and in common law in most countries, minors are considered minors and treated as minors in the sense of what their sort of prosecution or their, is going
and
to...
their rights and their protections and everything that goes with it.
And it's amazing.
That all exists in the military system.
Right.
There's maximum sentences for regular offences, but then those maximum sentences are much reduced when you're talking about a minor.
I want to break this down. The prosecution of terrorism or terrorist-related acts, everything that you mentioned, it could be everything from somebody with a suicide vest attempting to do something, or someone who does something, and he blows himself up, he or she, because terrorism is certainly non-gender based. And
gender equality for all terrorists.
Of course. Hey, DEI.
Exactly.
I mean, like, we provide inclusion and equity for all terrorists who want to be okay.
That, by the way, that was a development. It was a development by the Palestinians that you would have female suicide bombers. It wasn't so clear that was even acceptable.
Right.
So they developed that because there's no rules.
They're very progressive.
Very progressive.
Yes. So, okay. So someone blows themselves up. There might be prosecution with relation to the family who might have known about this, who might have been conspirators. Very, very much a judicial process. We don't go and take people out in the streets and put summary judgment on them at the moment. There is a judicial process over here. Everyone, even terrorists in Israel, have the right to a judicial process. Is that correct?
Every right that you can imagine exists in a normal, Western, functioning judicial system exists for the Palestinian terrorists.
Even for a radical terrorist who is there for the purpose to kill as many Jews as possible, we will take that person, if they survive, or those that conspired against them, because it's always a conspiracy. Is that correct? No one acts alone here.
No, almost no one acts alone. You have individual events where you have stabbings and things like that, where for whatever reason, it was common that someone, for example, it was exposed that they were homosexual. and then to clear their name of that stain, as it's perceived in Palestinian society, of being homosexual, your only way is to go out and kill a Jew. That's how you cleanse yourself of your illness of being homosexual in Palestinian society. You go and murder a Jew. Then you're a hero. You're no longer someone who is rejected by society.
There's a lot of manipulation by the leadership to seek out vulnerable people. They seek out people who have been caught in the act of something that would be considered immorally reprehensible, mentally challenged people.
Without question, you see that as well.
Sure.
Everyone is used and abused, but behind that you have this ideological drive that is fueled. And whilst everyone focuses nowadays on Hamas, Hamas is the evil institution, Hamas are the genocidal terrorists. How did we get to this situation? Who taught these children? Who socialized these children to this culture of death? That is the Palestinian Authority. This is Yasser Arafat. This is Mahmoud Abbas.
Is there a crime for the syllabus of hate?
Unfortunately, not.
And that's a problem.
It is not only a problem that there isn't a crime, it's a problem that the world is really an accomplice with the Palestinian Authority in what Hillary Clinton once described as fundamentally poisoning the minds of the Palestinian generation.
And it's not just in Israel, it's global.
It's all over.
It's in our schools. In the Toronto Board of Education, we have books that are victimizing Palestinians, that are turning against Israel as the aggressor, as the occupier. It is terrible, and I talk about it all the time. I talk about the syllabus of hate. The curriculum of education must change, and there must be legislative agency to do this. But let's get back a moment here in behind the lines of our terrorists and being convicted. I find it really incredible that Israel, an example of a moral and just society, because you have summary judgments in all pan-Arab countries to do with moral deviant behavior, or to do with where there is no trial, there is no long trial. But here the prosecution of somebody is a lengthy situation.
And like I said, it's everything that you could imagine in a normal situation. You have the right to remain silent. You can only be arrested if there's a specific suspicion that you've committed a crime. Once arrested, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to consult with a lawyer. You have a right, obviously, when an indictment is put in, to receive all of the prosecution's investigative materials that it intends to use in the trial. You have a right to confront your accusers. You have a right to be heard in trial. Every witness has to be brought to court and be subject to cross-examination. Everything, due process all the way along, as it's called in the legal terms, defining a system for criminal justice. All of those safeguards exist, and the terrorists know them, and they use them.
This is a country that is accused of genocide.
This is a country that even the legal system that I worked in is accused of being biased and insufficient. I would suggest and really invite anyone to compare the legal system in Judea and Samaria, the prosecution of the terrorists, to any other legal system.
So your role as prosecutor.
Yeah.
So you're prosecuting, you're taking the evidence of what you've gathered, and so you interview everyone involved in the situation, and you'll take that evidence and you'll use that to prosecute. And who's the public defender? Is it a Palestinian, or is it a Jew?
So here's the thing. Firstly, it's the police and the investigative authorities that really gather all the information. The job of the prosecution is to take the investigative file and to turn it into an indictment when there is a reasonable chance of a conviction. And then so you put in an indictment, who represents them. So in many cases, I could walk into a courtroom. Obviously, I'd been in that system for not a small amount of time. After a few years, I could walk into a courtroom, look at the lawyer and say, I know what's going to be in the indictment. Because each one of the terrorist organizations had their lawyers on retainer, whether it was the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, terrorist organization, communist,
But who are the
rejectionist.
lawyers?
So the lawyers come from really the spectrum of different backgrounds. Some of them are Israelis, some of them are Israeli Jews, some of them are Israeli Arabs, some of them are Palestinians.
And who's funding the lawyers?
And so the terrorist organizations have their own lawyers on retainer. There's then there's almost a public defense lawyers that the Palestinian Authority provides for any terrorist who's been arrested. A terrorist that doesn't have representation either from the terrorist organization to which he belonged or from the Palestinian Authority, listen to this carefully, gets a lawyer that is funded by the Israeli justice system.
So let me get this straight.
So they murdered, like, they blew up a bus.
Yeah.
They murdered 30 people. They don't have a lawyer. Israel will then fund a lawyer to represent them. It's an unbelievable
Talk to me
situation.
about what happens in the case of a terrorist suicide bomber where the terrorist had killed himself or herself, as we said earlier. Who are we prosecuting in that case? Are we prosecuting the person posthumously, or are we prosecuting others involved?
So we're prosecuting others involved.
Okay.
Let's give this a little bit of context for the time that we're talking about. We're talking now. Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Washington. He's a meeting with President Trump. They're discussing possible deals with Gaza. The terrorists are obviously demanding in return for the release of the hostages that Israel release terrorists. So who are the names that they have, and via them we'll talk about it. We're talking about people like Abdallah Barghouti. Like, no one's ever heard of Abdallah Barghouti. This is probably one of the worst terrorists that walked the face of the earth. He is responsible for the murder of 67 people, a series of suicide attacks. He was the bomb maker. He recruited the terrorists, and he sent them off to wantonly murder Jews and whoever else was caught on the way.
So how do you find out about this? Is through the investigation, I guess, through the police and various services will investigate a situation of a deceased bomber and find out where it all came from.
Exactly that. So you have the event, you have the explosion. Let's talk about the Sbarro
Sure.
pizza shop attack in August 2001. Izzadin al-Matsri, the suicide bomber, walks into the pizza shop, blows himself up, murders 15 people, and injures hundreds of others, and now it's August. It's the height of summer. It's Jerusalem. So the pizza shop was packed with people.
I remember it well.
And now you have this mass casualty event, and you start literally picking up the pieces of bodies in order to then create the trail backwards. Mm-hmm. Who is the suicide bomber? What did the suicide belt look like? What are the common elements in this suicide belt to other suicide attacks? Forensics, comparing and contrasting. Is this the same as an event that we've already seen? Is it a new event? Is it a new type of sewing? I once dealt with the sister of a terrorist called Ali Ajuri. All she did, in inverted commas, she was a seamstress, and she would sew the suicide belts. Right? So you have over time forensics, which you can gather up and you can say, now we have a starting point, let's go backwards. How did he get here? Where did he come from? Who could possibly have been in the area that would help him come into Jerusalem? And then you start using all types of technology to identify possible anomalies.
So you create a trail of responsibility.
Without
and
question.
You find out the people responsible, and you issue warrants for their arrest as accomplices and as part of this conspiracy to commit this act of terror. And each one of those people, are they prosecuted on the same level as being a terrorist as anybody else involved, as well as the person directly involved?
Well, so you have a range of different terror offenses, and each terrorist, each member of that chain of either command or chain of responsibility or involvement is prosecuted according to his contribution to the commission of the attack, whether it be ahead of time or after the fact.
Is there I don't know how you would say this in legal terms, but a schedule of sentencing, if you will?
So Israel, I discuss this subject a lot because it's something which isn't known. Israel's legal system provides a very almost interesting punishment arrangement, we'll call it. What happens is the Knesset, the Parliament of Israel, similar to the military commander, puts down a law. We say this action constitutes an offense. And then they say this is the maximum sentence that can be handed down to someone who has committed that offense. The judges then have almost complete discretion to decide what punishment will be handed down to each terrorist from the scale of 0 up to the maximum. So you have some type of rules that come into it.
Is the maximum life in prison? Is it 20 years? Is that the...
So the maximum, in theory, for certain offenses, is the death sentence.
Okay.
Israel still technically has the death sentence. We haven't used it for a very long time.
When was the last time that we have executed somebody?
Eichmann. 1962. That was the last time we used the death sentence.
And certainly there are many that have been deserving. There are many that have been deserving over the years, some of which who were redeemed through the disgusting commoditization and negotiation of life through these deals, who have gone on to murder many more Jews.
Sinwar. Had Sinwar been put to death, then we wouldn't have had the 7th of October. I mean, these are
debatable. It is debatable, but the fact is that he, being the mastermind of October 7th, the known mastermind, it is something that we have to account for.
The Palestinians celebrate 45 different instances in which Israel has released murderers, like thousands of murderers who should have been truthfully put to death for their crimes, have gone back onto the streets, and they return almost immediately to terrorism.
I find it, first of all, it's very interesting. And this is something that the outside world, outside of Israel, needs to understand, that the foundation of any democracy, the same democracy that our liberal friends in the West uphold dear and near to their lives, the same democracy that they accuse Israel of not being, that the foundation of democracy is its judicial system and its judicial process. Agreed? That is the health of a democracy.
Without question.
My name is Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View, a companion to the wake-up call. This is where truth breaks through the noise. Please, don't be shy. Show your appreciation for this podcast by liking it, sharing it, and commenting on it, and by following me on IsraelEllis.com and on Substack. Thank you for tuning in when you had the choice to tune out.